Welcome to Section 2, Getting to Know the Command Line. In this section, we will gently introduce you to the most fundamental concepts when starting to work in the Linux command line. Here, we will begin by showing you everything you need to know when working with basic commands and how they are structured. In this section, you also learn what shell globbing and quoting is. Next, you will learn how to get help when working with commands by using various sources of documentation and manuals. Afterwards, we will teach you the very basic shortcuts and tricks to move around the command line more efficiently. Afterwards, you will learn what commands input and output streams are and how you can use them for redirection and piping. Next, you will learn the very basics of regular expressions and how to use them using three of the most important Linux shell commands: grep, set and awk. We end this section by showing you how you can browse and navigate your files and folders in a Linux system. This is video introducing the command line part 1, which is called Working with Commands. Here we will start teaching you how you can run Linux command line programs and what their basic structure is. You will also learn what program, options and arguments are and why they are important for customizing your commands. First, open up a new terminal emulator and log into your CentOS 7 server using SSH as we learned in the previous section. Log in using your normal user account you set up during installation because, as said before, never work with the root user unless you have to. In my example, the username is called OllyP. After successfully logging into your server, an important program has been started automatically, which is called the shell and which we are using all the time. In fact, when we are talking about the Linux command line, what we are really speaking of is the shell. There exist several shell variants. On CentOS 7 we are using the bash or born again shell by default. When the shell is started, the first thing you will notice is the line ending with the $sign, which is called the shell prompt. In our example, it gives us some useful information: the login username and the current directory we're at. The tilde is a special character and means home directory, which is the default directory when logging in. More about different directories on a Linux system in video 1.6 in this section. After the shell prompt there follows the cursor, which is the underscore character, and this is where the user can type in text, which then gets processed and executed by the shell. But user input will only get processed and executed by the shell when the input has been ended by the return key. If you make any typo mistakes, just hit the backspace key to delete the last character. The first useful command we will learn in this video is to log out from the system. On a real Linux terminal, this command logs out the current user and goes back to the login prompt screen. We know from video 1.3. Type in logout and press the return key. However, if you do this while using an SSH connection, it has the same effect as the exit command we learned in the last section. Let's relog in back to the server. Now let's try out a simple command. Type date and press the return key. This is a command which prints out the current date. As you see, if the shell has finished executing a specific command and is ready to accept new input by the user, a new shell prompt will appear in a new line, marking its readiness. Next, type cal and press the return key. This command prints out a nice table view of the current month. Please note that if the first character of any command typed or prepended in the shell is the hash key, the command will not be executed when pressing the return key. In this video training, we will use this feature every time we want to highlight some important concept or definition for the viewer. A typical Linux system such as CentOS 7 contains hundreds of different commands included in the default installation. If we could only type in pure command names and nothing more, our work in the shell would be very limited and static, and we would not be able to work properly at all. So we need a way to customize our commands or change their default behavior during execution, feeding them further information. But how can we do that? Enter the power of command line options and arguments. First, we need to discuss the general structure of a command in the shell, which in its most simple form is command name, options, arguments. The command name is the name of the command to be started. Be careful. In Linux, command names are case sensitive. Type who am I, then press the return key. This command will print out the name of the current user working in the shell. As Linux is case sensitive, this command cannot be started using uppercase letters, such as each version refers to a different command. Here we will also see why the shell is such a useful program. It not only listens and interprets commands, but it also shows you helpful error messages when something went wrong, such as a command cannot be found in the system. Please note that normally on Linux, all standard bash shell commands are written lowercase. Here is a list of some of the available commands. Please note that you don't need to understand the next command yet. Now to one of the most fundamental commands available in the shell. Type in ls and press the return key. This command lists files in a directory. If no further information is given, it prints out all the visible files in the current directory we are in at the moment. Don't worry, we will talk about directories soon in an upcoming section. But back to our general structure example. As you see, a shell command can also contain options and arguments. which are appended to the command name and separated from it using spaces. This means if you want to provide at least one option or argument, then we need at least one space after the command name. First, let's talk about command line options. Their aim is to influence the behavior of a command. They are also called switches or flags. There is no obligatory standard, but normally any single letter command line option starts with a single dash, whereas longer option names have two dash symbols. Also, if you want to provide multiple single character command line options, for most standard Linux commands you can just write them in series. Also, it is good to know that single letter command line options are often abbreviations describing their meaning. -d could be standing for directory, -x for exclude, etc. We already know that the ls command, without any further options, gives us a list of all the files in the current directory. If you type ls space -a and press the return key, you just run your first command with the command line option. The A switch stands for all. This influences ls's default behavior by giving you a list of all files including the hidden ones, which in Linux are starting with a leading dash in the current directory. Now let's type ls space -alth, press the return key. This influences the command's default behavior even more by using the -a flag we just discussed before, plus using the -l switch, which stands for list and which prints out the files in the list format including more detailed information such as the creation date. -t stands for time and sorts the file list by modification date, with the newest entries appearing first, and -h stands for human readable and will print out the file size in a more readable form using megabytes instead of bytes for file size. Please note that often command line options can have arguments bound to them. We will show later. In addition to options, we also have command line arguments, which are also called parameters. These are any dynamic or free text piece of information which is not an option and which gets fed into the command when it gets started. Typical examples are file names or directories the command wants to process during execution. Arguments are also divided by spaces. Type echo space hello and press the return key. Here hello is an argument for the echo command and not an option. The echo command is one of the most fundamental shell commands available. It just prints the arguments given to it back to the command line. As we will see, this is ideal for testing shell features, such as globbing. We will learn later in this section. Now let's type in ls space al space /boot space /var. Press the return key. In this example, for the first time, we both use command line options and arguments. The command ls is executed with the options a and l and the arguments /boot and /var. This will print out all the files including hidden ones in detailed list view in the /boot and /var directory. As mentioned before, oftentimes arguments are bound to specific options. For example, the talk command, which we will discuss in a later video, needs to process an input file which you have to specify directly after the -f option and nowhere else. Or in short, as the input file argument is bound to the -f option, the following approach is incorrect and will produce errors.
In this video you have learned what the shell is and that on CentOS 7 we are using the bash shell. When we say Linux command line, we are really meaning the shell. It's important to notice here that the shell is not the same as a terminal emulator. A terminal is a screen or window which lets you access a Linux server's input and output. A shell is just a program which runs on the server as any other command and which waits for, interprets, processes, executes and responds to commands typed in by the user. We also learned how to execute commands and learned a number of commands to use, such as the ls command. Finally, we learned how to customize running your commands using the concept of options and arguments.